All right, Alexander. So Justin Trudeau has resurfaced from hiding, and he appeared to the Parliament, and he gave a speech about what's going on in Ottawa and actually all throughout Canada now. And he's not looking for dialogue. He's not looking for reconciliation. He just doubled down on the fact that these people are bad and they're evil and they're the R word and they're the white S word. And this is undemocratic what they're doing, and it's not safe, and they need to be disbanded and punished. And anyway, all the rhetoric that we've been hearing from his government over the last 8, 9, 10 days since this has started. It's an occupation. That is the buzz. It's an occupation. It's an insurrection. It's by R people and white S people and all these things. Confederate flags, he said as well, and NAZI flags. I'm convinced that was a plan to those people with those flags were actually the one person that actually had one NAZI flag and another person had a Confederate flag. I'm positive that those were plants in order to.
I agree with that. Anyway, but for the record, I agree with that.
It's obvious.
Yeah,
it's obvious. Anyway, Trudeau has resurfaced. Alexander, what do you think is going to happen with everything that is going on? My main question to you is, what do you think is going to be the result of all of this? We're seeing that this freedom convoy is getting more decentralized.
Yes.
It's spreading to other cities. With every action that the government takes, whether it's to get their fuel, to confiscate the fuel, to arrest people, it's hardening the truckers' resolve. And it's not only truckers, it's all the people there. It's hardening their resolve.
Yes.
Other cities in Canada, other provinces in Canada, other people are saying they're going to send support to the people in Ottawa. We're seeing protests in other cities as well. We're seeing protests on the border between the U.S. and Canada. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think this could topple the government of Trudeau? Looking back in history, do you think this could topple the government? Do you think this could force Trudeau to re-elections, to have calling snap elections? Or do you think, I'm going to pose another couple scenarios and then just take the whole video. Are you afraid that some sort of false flag event might happen? In other words, more provocateurs may show up in Ottawa to create a scenario where police or military are called in. Does that worry you? What do you think is going to happen here? Because
absolutely, it does worry.
The option for dialogue seems like it's just not in the cards at all.
No, it's not on the cards at all. And what appears to be happening is that this thing is spreading. And of course, as we've discussed, truckers are key workers. They can't, the economy can't function without them. And more appear to be joining rather than less. And as you correctly say, the attempts to do all sorts of things, seizing funds, which is an extraordinary thing to do. I mean, because that's essentially what that was all about. And all those other things, they seem to be causing the protests to spread and to harden. And of course, this is a difficult protest to categorize in the way that Trudeau is trying to do, because of course the protest has been peaceful, overwhelmingly so. And just to talk about some of the things that you mentioned that these people have been called, it seems that in the original Ottawa protest, quite a few of the people involved were Sikhs. So that doesn't really fit into the narrative that's been constructed at all. So where does that leave Trudeau? Well, he's come out, he's not prepared to talk. I think if he has negotiations now, something which he could have done perfectly easily a few days ago, perhaps even before the convoy arrived in Ottawa, he could have had talks with these people. He could have explained his policy. He could have acted like a democratic leader. If he does it now, if he changes policy after all these very hardline positions that he's taking, well, his credibility and his authority will be weakened. And I don't think he can accept that. I think that if he did that, his position as Prime Minister would be severely undermined. The position of his government would be severely undermined. And I think at that point, the whole thing could begin to start to implode. So it seems to me that two options start to loom. Option one is to enforce a crackdown, get the police, unleash the riot police, unleash the other types of police, get the courts to start issuing more injunctions, start bringing the military in perhaps, start to take those kind of steps. And of course, that always runs the huge risk that the situation could then escalate, at which point you could find yourself in the kind of situation that France found itself in May 1968, with the whole thing exploding, more workers coming out, perhaps political strikes starting to spread because people begin to feel that they have to protect themselves against this kind of thing. So that the option of a crackdown is a very dangerous one, but the language that's being used appears to make it possible that that's the way things are heading. The other option, I think, is not Trudeau resigning, because that's not what he's going to do, but Trudeau calling an election and, saying who governs, I, the democratically elected Prime Minister in my government, or these dangerous people who are occupying parts of Ottawa and doing that sort of thing. Now, that's also a high-risk strategy. And I'm going to here mention something that happened that I remember very well, and it happened in Britain, which is that in the early 1970s, the British government of that period, led by a man called Edward Heath, Conservative Prime Minister, found itself in a face-off with the coal miners, the British coal miners, and this is causing power outages in Britain. And Edward Heath didn't want to give ground to the miners, so he called an election in exactly that kind of way, say, who governs, the miners or me? And what happened was he lost the election because the British population, the British electorate at that time had a lot of sympathy for the miners. And it seems to me that a lot of people have sympathies this time with the truckers. That is a dangerous thing to do. So Trudeau could do either one or the other, but the rhetoric points to a crackdown.
If this, the longer this continues without any concrete action taken by the Trudeau government, whether it's in the form of dialogue or whether it's in the form of a crackdown, I imagine the advantage goes to the truckers. I mean,
yes,
it's obvious that Trudeau is trying to starve them off. They're confiscating fuel and food, and they're trying to make arrests. So it's obviously he's trying to make life difficult on them under the hopes that they're just going to get up and leave. But that's not the case. So the more this continues, the more the people are allowed to stay in Ottawa. I imagine that's more of a risk for Trudeau's government.
Yeah. If this thing snowballs, it becomes a crisis. It's not yet a crisis, not yet a full-on crisis. But the longer it goes on, the weaker he looks, the more likely it is to snowball. Then a crisis starts to build, and at some point, his position begins to look untenable. And then, of course, the question is whether the government can survive and whether, Trudeau has to step down, because, of course, voices will then start to be raised by the business community saying, you've got to resolve this because business is suffering, and they will start to put pressure on Trudeau if he can't talk to the truckers to make way for somebody who can. So the longer it goes on, provided he does snowball, the more dangerous the situation becomes for Trudeau. Now, what he's trying to do is he's trying to suffocate it. He's trying to choke it off by doing all the things you said, cutting off the fuel, cutting off the money, doing all those sort of things. It's not working at the moment. And of course, the problem he's finding is that parallel structures are being created, societal structures are being created to make this protest continue, with the great risk, as I said, that it snowballs. And for a government, when parallel structures start to appear, that is an extremely dangerous thing indeed. Governments begin to become extremely nervous about that. So, as I said, I think the prospect of a crackdown is very high. I doubt that Trudeau feels confident enough to call an election. And as I said, we see how that could go horribly wrong, as it did with Edward Heath in Britain and the Conservatives in their standoff against the miners in 1973-74. So, I think Trudeau doesn't have the confidence to do that. Everything about the way he's talking, the kind of speeches he's making, points instead to a crackdown.
Well, I want your thoughts on this. I worry that a crackdown is, I don't want to say the only option, but it seems like the most likely option. But I think that Trudeau doesn't want to just go in right now without a reason to go in. And this is where I come back to my false flag statement. Do you worry that Trudeau and the deep state will say, you know what, a crackdown is our best option going forward, but we need an impetus, we need a reason in order to send in the police or the military. So once again, let's create some sort of event, perhaps maybe tinge it with a little racism and a little white S, in order to spice it up some, and then we can send in the military and the police or something along those lines in order to have this crackdown, which is what I think
absolutely.
they believe is their only way out of this.
Well, indeed, in other words, provocation tactics is entirely possible. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it is entirely possible. But what I would say is, whether they do it through the use of provocation tactics, if they find a way to justify via provocation tactics, or if they just decide to do it, it's the trend. I mean, it's what the Democrats are doing in the United States. I mean, they're cracking down all over the place. And it seems to me that Trudeau, who is joined at the hip with them, it gives every impression of being inclined to go the same way. I'm going to say something. We've talked about the way in which if the truckers win in Canada, if they achieve what they want in Canada, that could have a domino effect elsewhere. The country which would be looking at this particularly closely if it happened, and where, of course, the political class must be particularly nervous about all of this, is the United States. You only have to read the kind of things that, the Democratic aligned media in the United States, which is to say practically all of it, has been saying for the last year, to understand how nervous they are. And of course, if they see a protest like this succeed in Canada, a protest led by the very same sort of deplorables that the Democrats are so unhappy about in the US, we all know what I mean and whom I'm referring to by that expression, deplorables. If they see that succeed in Canada, the political class in the US will be beside themselves with worry. And I'm pretty sure that there's all kinds of messages going across the border, not just from Washington, but from all over the place, from San Francisco, Seattle, New York, wherever, all these people talking to Canada, talking to their friends in Canada, talking to Trudeau directly, and say, look, you've got to get this under control. You've got to bring this under control. You've got to crack down. You've got to bring this thing to a stop. Oddly enough, it reminds me, if you want me to tell you what it reminds me of in some ways, it reminds me of Solidarity in Poland in 1980. It was, the Soviets and all their and all the other East European communist states at that time, they were incredibly nervous about what was going on in Poland, and putting enormous pressure at that time on the Polish government, the communist Polish government, to order a crackdown, which of course it did, and it was temporarily successful, and of course, in the end, looking back, we can see that crackdown was simply, the last throw that those governments had to play, and it was simply a reflection of how brittle their position ultimately was.
Right. So, final question. We've also talked about the global implications of everything that's going on. Alexander, I'm on Zero Hedge right now. Let me just read you some passages real quick. In New Zealand, truckers reportedly launched a convoy from both the North and the South Islands. They are slated to converge at the country's capital, Wellington, according to the New Zealand Herald.
Yes.
Truckers in the United Kingdom will also demonstrate against mandates in Glasgow suburb and will drive to Edinburgh, the capital, before heading to London, organizers told the Scottish Daily Express newspaper.
Yes.
Freedom convoys will also depart in the English cities of Manchester, Exeter, Bristol, and Bournemouth, as well as in cities in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. In the Netherlands, according to the local NL Times, dozens of trucks and other vehicles gathered in Leeuwarden to protest the mandates and restrictions. On Sunday, a video was posted on Freedom Convoy Netherlands group. And in Australia, Capital Territory police say that they expect crowd sizes for convoy to Canberra to peak on February 8th when Australia's parliament resumes. Protesters led by truckers are expected to gather outside Parliament House. And of course, you have the United States, where there's concrete information that there are truckers that are planning something from West Coast to East Coast. And Facebook has actually removed many groups that are organizing this. So my question to you is, what do you think Ardern, Rutte, Morrison, Biden, Johnson, what do you think all these leaders are telling Trudeau at this very moment?
Well, they're telling him to bring this to an end and to crack down. I mean, I am sure of it. I mean, I doubt Johnson himself is, because of course he's far too distracted by his own political problems. Though it's important to say that though in Britain most of the restrictions have been lifted, in Scotland the government there has been trying to go its own way and has been, closer aligned in some ways to the policies that Trudeau and the others are following than the government in London, the Boris Johnson government in London, has been up to now. So that explains some of the unrest in Britain, which, note, a lot of it originates in Scotland. So all of these people are watching and worrying about the situation in Canada, and maybe they're not all calling Trudeau, but quite a few of them are. And as I said, I've no doubt at all, they're very nervous. They're telling Trudeau, for heaven's sake, get control of this thing, bring it under control, and if you need to launch a crackdown, then go ahead and do it, and we'll support you.
Does a crackdown worry you, real quick?
Oh, of course it worries me. Like crackdowns are always very, very dangerous
unpredictable
things.
Aspect.
Yeah, there's always an unpredictable aspect of it. I mean, Macron launched a crackdown, if you remember, against the yellow vests, and it's to a great extent succeeded. But of course, that's France, which has a tradition of, very tough police action, and where the CRS, the French riot police, are very well organized. Other countries it might not be so easy. And of course, in Canada, it would be a completely new thing, and it might easily go hideously wrong. So always these things can turn terribly ugly and terribly bad. And I come back to what I said. The tragedy is that we have a political class in the West that is very, very unsure of its legitimacy now and of its support within the wider communities of their societies. They don't feel able to talk. They don't have that deep commitment and understanding of democracy that political leaders in the West used to have. And so they lack the flexibility and the willingness to talk. They're too ideological and dogmatic to want to talk. And of course, they're inching towards a crackdown, and that could take things in a terrible turn.
All right, we will leave it there and continue to monitor this story. Guys, if you're watching this on Rumble, up top you'll find a button to locals. Just click on that button and you will be taken to our locals community. Rumble and locals, they're integrated, so one click of the button takes you to locals, where we have all kinds of other great exclusive content. So if you're watching this from Rumble, you'll see the button up top to locals. Also, Super U, ODYSEE, and BitChute. Other platforms where you can find our videos on those great platforms as well. And the Duran shop, 10% off when you use the code GOODDAY. There it is on that magic mug. 10% off all merch when you use that code. Take care.